According to one paranormal researcher, modern communications technologies have always been haunted. Here is the astonishing story of a home computer that became a portal to entities from both the long-gone past and distant future. In 1984, 3 young people moved into a share house, a 19th century cottage in the village of Dodleston near Chester in England. One evening, Ken Webster, Nicola Baguely and Debbie Oakes were walking up the path to their home when they saw through the window a green light pulsating inside the darkness of the cottage. After a quick double take, they realised it was coming from their loaned BBC microprocessor, not such an unusual sight these days. Ken was a teacher at the local school where the IT department allowed him to borrow it on weekends. He didn't want to risk damaging it, so rushed inside to turn off the machine. At that time, personal computers were rare and expensive commodities, and the clunky beige BBC with its tiny black screen was a prized and valuable object. However, as Ken hastened to power off, he noticed glowing green words on the computer screen. This was a screed that neither he, Nick, nor Debbie had written, and which took the form of an eerie, almost ominous poem addressed to the 3. The strange verse was the first of what became known in the paranormal community as the Dodleston messages. As described in Ken's later book, The Vertical Plane, the first signs of supernatural activity in the cottage had begun early. One morning, as the 3 were painting the kitchen, they noticed a peculiar set of footprints that, as they watched, seemed to be walking directly up the wall. The strange, spindly, 6-toed prints then seemed to walk straight through the ceiling. Attributing the marks to grime in the old house, the trio painted over them, only for them to reappear the following day. Soon after this occurrence, Debbie, Ken and Nick began to routinely discover cat food tins, bottles and various other small household items stacked in precarious towers, sometimes piled to over 4 feet high. The 3 concluded that it must be a housewarming prank played by local friends, although the bizarre activity grew out of hand. The stacking of multiple objects in piles extended to crockery, plates and all food cans. Although unsettled, the housemates tried to put this bizarre compulsive stacking out of their minds. However, over the next few days, unexplained cold gusts of wind, shadows and an eerie presence, as if of an invisible entity, beleaguered the residents of the Cheshire cottage. 2 months after the appearance of the strange poem, the 3 returned from a drive to find a mysterious computer file saved as REATE. Within the file, they found a message in English, but seemingly a very archaic lingo, and again strangely antagonistic. The strange messages started out by apparently asking the new house residents who they were. The writer appeared to be able to see them and basically accused them of stealing his house. The 3 housemates were now feeling confused and even slightly threatened. Ken decided to seek the advice of an academic and showed the messages to his colleague Peter Trinder, who was a teacher of medieval literature. According to Webster's later book, Trinder was convinced that the message was written in Old English. His assessment interpreted the mention of devil lights as meaning the computer, so described as by someone having no awareness of communication technology. The astonishing aspect of the haunting was that the ghost appeared quite capable and happy to communicate via a word processor, at that time clunky technology using floppy disks. Throughout the following 18 months, the messages continued to appear on the computer. The sender declared that his name was Lucas and that he had lived in the same cottage as the housemates, but in the year 1521. Lucas had initially believed that Ken, Nick and Debbie were demons or ghosts, describing paranormal activity occurring in his home as similar to what the new residents were experiencing in 1984-5. Basically, each party believed the other to be a ghost. Ken Webster became determined to figure out who or what was creating the strange, regularly appearing messages. He asked the entity a string of questions about where and when he was from, such as what college he went to and who was the current reigning monarch. In return, Lucas, suspicious about the housemates' motives, deliberately laid historical traps for them to check if they were really from the future. In so doing, the ghost's real name later emerged as Thomas Harden or Hawarden. A man with this name had existed and was vicar of a church in Gloucestershire during the 1550s. As the messages continued, it became clear that Thomas could observe some of the activities in the cottage, as he would make comments about photos left around the computer by Webster. He described a picture of a Jaguar car as a cart and a crude thing, as without the horse it would not go far. Lucas, now known to be Thomas, then wrote that he was confused about Webster saying he was living in the year 1985. He stated that he had assumed he was also from 2109, like his friend who had brought the box of lights, i.e. the computer. It transpired that the 2109 so-called collective of individuals purportedly from the distant future had visited in order to set up a time link within the cottage. Puzzled by this statement, Webster decided to write to 2109 on the computer, curious to see what might happen. Amazingly, they, 2109, responded, saying that the three housemates had a purpose in lifetime that would change the face of history. They, 2109, were unable to affect their thoughts directly, but would provide some kind of guidance that would allow room for their own destinies. Astonishingly, the communications were now spanning 3 seemingly active timelines over more than 600 years. 2109 then began leaving messages for Ken and Debbie, claiming involvement in an experiment or project with a higher purpose, conversing in a very different tone and language, and using scientific terms while providing few details about their objectives. However, they were annoyed when Ken and Debbie found out Lucas's real name and worried that this disclosure would disrupt their plans. The Society for Psychical Research, the main paranormal investigation agency in the UK, visited the house 3 times in order to investigate the residents' claims. However, Lucas, or Thomas, suddenly became shy and they found no evidence of any spirit activity within the home. One day, when the investigators were present but had gone on a walk during a break, the spirit swiftly typed a message for Ken on the disc. The unexplainable part was that it typed it on a part of the disc that took 8.5 minutes to access on the ancient computer, yet did it in less than a minute, a seeming impossibility. Fortunately, Lucas turned out to be a good-natured soul who told the housemates that he didn't mind them residing in his house. Although he continued to make his presence felt, throwing pieces of metal pipe around when they had visitors, the pieces being warm when they were picked up. He also made the upper floor of the house shake, as if in an earthquake. He bent the handle of a copper pan, then straightened it a couple of days later, and strangely the handle, although rusted, looked completely undamaged. Lucas continued with his messages until March 21st, 1985, when he suddenly started claiming that some other citizens of Dodleston had accused him of witchcraft due to his communications with the housemates. He was planning to flee his land after receiving threats from the villagers that they intended to kill him and burn his house. In his last communication, he stated that it was good to know that things would change, even though 400 years was a long time and there was much for humans to go through. Lucas, aka Thomas, finally wrote, "It is sad that men have to learn righteousness from their ugly ways." The spirit said that he was writing the story of events from his perspective and that he would leave his book where it could be discovered in the future. Apparently, 2109 also stated that the book would be found at some point. If the book does exist and is ever found, it would be a compelling piece of evidence to this paranormal mystery. The 3 house residents never heard from Lucas or 2109 ever again after he fled the house. They did later report that they had felt strangely depleted and lethargic during Lucas's tenancy, as if he was using their energy for his manifestations. This would support the theory of pre-war investigator Harry Price, who believed that poltergeists are real spirits who need to use the energy of human beings for their activities, as opposed to the theory that they are random outbreaks of disturbances of someone's unconscious mind. Today, the Dodleston messages continue to puzzle paranormal investigators, whether they were the result of a time slip, the work of a complex poltergeist, or simply one of the earliest examples of a computer hoax. According to author Eric Davis, the Dodleston messages continued a long-term trend. He says that modern communications technologies have always been haunted, so it is not surprising that home computers were quickly utilised as portals to other realms. Interestingly, Ken Webster is today considered a global thought leader on the circular economy and has continued to write books, now about nature-based solutions to the survival of our planet.